Insects! The silly little guys of the world. Since I was a little lad, I've been fascinated by all kinds of these critters, and especially so with their appearances in media. And while there were a lot of series that helped develop my love for these guys, the biggest one to me was actually Pokemon. But second to that was Yu-Gi-Oh! I remember seeing some of the episodes against Weevil growing up, and was deeply engrossed by his deck. And it's certainly where my love for moths started, which has led to my son not being a moth. I never played many insect decks as a kid, because I was bad at deck building. But when I fully got back into the series around the release of Master Duel, one of the first decks I built was a Digital Bug deck. Partly because they were free with the solo mode, but hey, I wanted them anyway. And as I got back into the game, I went and learned of all the insect decks that have been added since my return. From the world's winning powerhouse of Insectors, to the niche infestation of crawlers, to the recently released Raikou, including several archetypes that debuted in the manga and anime. However, as I looked through the card lists, I noticed multiple insect cards that never got released. Be it due to them not being interesting enough to print, tricky to work in the real game mechanics, or just not having room in packs to be printed, multiple cards remain unprinted to this day, even decades after they premiered. And it was also around this time during research that I learned of one of my favorite things Konami has been doing recently, the Animation Chronicles. This wasn't the first set to primarily focus on bringing old anime archetypes into the actual game, but with the main series animes ending with Vrains to focus on Rush Duel, these began to feel more special, when they weren't carving out cards to put into other sets. And hey, recently Animation Chronicles 2014 got announced. So you know what? Let's look through all of the unreleased insect cards, see what we can find, which ones could be added to the game, which ones could use a few tweaks, and which ones really need some major overhaul. A couple things to note. While I am including spells and traps in the discussion, I'm only going to be talking about the ones whose effects work with insect cards, not ones that simply are insect themed or have insect themed artwork. Infestation, for example, is a card Weevil used in the anime, and by its name and artwork should be insect support. But knowing its effect doesn't specifically work with insects, so it will be skipped over. Also, I will only be looking at the anime insects in this video. I am aware there's a slew of insect support from the manga, but there's actually a lot of them, especially for the 5Ds cards. Enough so that I could probably make its own video. Let me know if you'd be interested in seeing that. But with all that out of the way, let's start the series where it began with... Now there's a pretty obvious place to look for support in duel monsters, that being with the parasite himself, Weevil Underwood. And yeah, he does have multiple unreleased cards in Waking the Dragons. However, after doing some research, I was shocked to learn there was one insect card from Battle City that never got printed, and that was Soldier Ant, known as Soldier Ari in the manga. This was a level 4 normal insect whose flavor text says, "An ant that turned vicious as a result of spontaneous mutation. Its body is relatively stiff and durable." Now, the reason why this card was forgotten isn't hard to understand, as its only purpose was to be tributed away for the effect of multiplication of ants. However, that does actually give us something to talk about. See, whenever Konami takes a monster that is effectless from the manga or anime, they'll usually give it some sort of effect relating to how it was used in the duel. Because this card is connected to multiplication of ants, and we know that Konami likely won't release this as a vanilla monster, it's safe to say that this card will have an effect like, when this card is summoned, add multiplication of ants from deck to hand. And if it had an effect like that, it would likely see experimentation as a one card link too. However, it would have an issue that it only puts one insect in the graveyard. Might not sound bad on the surface, but it makes using Beargram and Doomdozer harder in hands that normally can't get 2 insects in the graveyard. Not to mention it would turn multiplication of ants into a soft garnet, assuming it can't add multiplication back from the graveyard. The only other thing worth noting is that if this card was for some reason released as a normal monster, it would actually have use with Gokipole. Gokipole, when sent to the graveyard, lets you add a level 4 insect from deck to hand. Then if you added a normal monster, you can special summon it, then destroy a monster with equal or higher attack. Currently the best targets for this are Gokibore and Killer Needle, both of which have 1200 attack. Soldier Ant meanwhile has only 500, meaning it would be able to destroy things that they couldn't, but that's a very niche use and likely wouldn't come up that often. Moving on to Waking the Dragons, Parasite Caterpillar is the one I think a lot of people are familiar with. When it's attacked, it equips itself to the attack target after damage calculation, then turns that monster into an insect. That monster can't attack or be tributed, and if it's the only card your opponent controls, you can attack directly. During your opponent's third standby phase, both Parasite Caterpillar and the equipped monster are destroyed, and Poison Butterfly is summoned to your opponent's side of the field. Poison Butterfly is just a level 7 that can't be summoned except by Parasite Caterpillar's effect, and the controller takes 500 damage during each end phase. Naturally, both of these cards aren't going to be doing much nowadays, especially when a kaiju can do the same thing but better. But the idea is there. Parasite Caterpillar would actually be alright if it triggered off of effect destruction as well, and if it also prevented the monster from being used for any type of other summon, since in its current state it would just be linked off or something. Poison Butterfly would also need a downside where it can't be used for an extra deck summon, kinda like Spiral Double Agent, but I'd also feel the downside should be harsher. Waiting 3 turns to give your opponent a 2700 attack point monster that only deals 500 damage isn't great. At that point you would be better off just using Lava Golem. Following off of this, we have Pheromone Wasp, which after inflicting battle damage by a direct attack, special summons a level 4 or lower insect monster from your deck at the end of the battle phase. Like Parasite Caterpillar, this one has a good idea, and in some aspects it does kinda work, as it being a level 3 means it can summon another level 3 in order to overlay into Cicada King, or link off into a link summon. The worst part of this card really is the direct attack requirement, as the card doesn't have a way to attack directly themselves, but honestly given that in the enemy attacked past Obnoxious Celtic Guard, thanks to Parasite Caterpillar, I could see them just letting this guy attack directly, similarly to how they did with Puppet Pawn. The summon happening at the end of the battle phase is a bit annoying, but since it summons any insect, I think it's fine. What isn't fine is this fucking thing. Armored Centipede is a level 5 with 1600 attack and defense, and its only effect is that it gains 500 attack when it destroys an insect by battle. Way to go, champ. Turning enemy cards into insects was a brief idea that insects had that never took off, and as a result this guy doesn't have much going for him. And even if he did, most level 4s have better stats than him. In fact, even comparing him to a level 4 is unfavorable, cause this is basically just a worse version of Insect Princess, which in addition to the attack increase, forces enemy insects into attack mode and has 300 more attack than him. Nothing short of a full remake could save him. The last insect from Duel Monsters is, interestingly enough, one not used by Weevil, but by instead Merrick. Vampiric Leech is a level 4 that strangely enough has the same stats as Soldier Ant, and has the unique effect of being able to attack turn 1. After it attacks, it can switch itself to defense mode by discarding 1 card. Alright, let's get it out of the way. That first effect can never be added to the game because the logistics of being able to enter the battle phase turn 1 are something Konami ain't gonna be solving anytime soon. So unless this becomes a burn effect, this ain't happening. The discard cost for a battle position change is terrible and is outclassed by shit like Submarine Roid. It does make more sense in the context of the duel where it was used to dump Raw turn 1 so Merrick could revive it later, so I guess they could make this an Armageddon Knight for Raw cards, but that's all I got. Not even sure if Raw decks would want something like that. Now that's all the monsters for the series, but there's a couple spell cards left over. Level 2 Power Boost is an equip spell that gives an insect monster 1200 attack and 200 defense. Pretty boring card and is actually worse than Bio Insect Armor. Reckless Parasite is basically half of Parasite Parasite, as it summons it from deck and while it's on your opponent's field, turns their monsters into insects and prevents them from being tributed. It pairs well with it, but Parasite isn't doing much nowadays anyway, and outside of also preventing your opponent from making extra deck cards, this wouldn't change much. Cell Division lets you make a token copy of a level 3 or lower insect monster you control, which is kinda neat, but basically does the same thing as multiplication. If it worked on level 4s and summoned another copy from deck, I could see this being comboed with Resonance Insect, but other than that it's just okay. Then again, using this on Insecta Dragonfly while you have the Ladybug loop on standby would be a pretty good way to extend their combos, but I don't think it's something they actually need. And finally, Mimesis lets you return an insect that is being attacked to the hand to summon a new insect and make that the attack target. I could actually see this effect being given to Parasite Caterpillar as a way to bounce an insect to protect it while getting Parasite Caterpillar killed to infect an enemy. And it would be fitting since that was used with Parasite Caterpillar. On its own, I don't think it's really worth printing, but as part of Caterpillar, I could see it being really decent. GX thankfully has fewer cards to talk about, so this should be a bit quicker. There are only 2 insects to look at, the first being Magical Longicorn. A level 4 with 600 attack, 1600 defense, and while it's in attack position, negate the effects of your spell cards. If you're looking at this and wondering what the hell were they thinking, I completely understand. This was a card that was designed to be given to your opponent to shut down their spell cards, similarly to Dark Angel, which hilariously enough didn't even work in the episode it was used in. Even ignoring the obvious issues of being able to link it off, this card still wouldn't be great even if it couldn't be used as link material, because the effect negate only applies while in attack position. And unless you found a big brain way to give it to your opponent during their turn, they can just switch it to defense mode, or even walk it into your attack position monsters during the battle phase. If it negated your opponent's spell cards while keeping itself in attack position, then it'd be better, probably would see play, but would be extremely boring. Then again, it's not like insects don't already have floodgate cards. The other insect is Sand Doodlebug.
Watch out, guys. You don't want to see what 1200 attack points of Doodlebug can do.
Which during either player's end phase blows up a level 4 or lower monster, can attack directly, and while Wasteland is on the field, can negate one attack. And yes, that is the old ass field spell Wasteland, which does not give its stat boost to insects. It really could just be any field spell for its effect, but it still wouldn't be super helpful. It could even negate every attack and still be underwhelming. Same with the pop effect. It could pop anything, but it's still not great. Bit too slow for the modern game unfortunately, and too uninteresting to talk about any further. As for the two spells we have, Insect Garden is a field spell that gives your opponent all of your level 4 or lower insects.
That's it?
Even as far as gimmicks go, this one's pretty bad. Unless you're planning on using Rivalry of Warlords to lock them into insects, or giving them Magical Longicorn, this does nothing. And even then, there are better options for that. What makes it worse is that the effect isn't optional, meaning you have to do this after all of your plays are done, lest you give your opponent free link material. Unless you're gonna try and OTK them for the cards you gave them. This card really needs an upside, like maybe once per turn you give them an insect to summon an insect with the same level from deck. Then you could give them one that floats, then use Beargram or Goki Pole to pop it in order to make use of its effect. But the chances that that's the change it's gonna get are as likely as it getting printed to begin with. The last GX card is Insect Pheromone, which can only be equipped to Insect Princess. Oh my fucking god, she's back. If she destroys a monster by battle, she can force an insect the opponent controls to attack. It's a GX era equipped spell if I've ever seen one. The fact that it only works on Insect Princess is also a major slap in the face, especially when she's barely better than Armored Centipede. Maybe if it was a generic equipped spell that let an insect attack again, it would be fine, but it's just kinda boring. All in all, nothing super interesting or good coming out of the GX anime, at least when it comes to insect support. Moving on to 5Ds, and while I thought we should have some good stuff at first glance, we actually kinda don't. The main insect user of this anime was Roman Godwin, and while I figured he would have some unreleased insect support to talk about, the majority of his unreleased cards are Earthbound or Mortal support. I guess I could technically talk about them since Uru is an insect?
No.
However, there was one card he did use that I can talk about, and it might actually be the card from this video that is the least likely to get printed. Meet Dark Tuner Spider Cocoon. It's a dark level 5 with no attack and defense, and its only effect is that if your opponent controls a monster and you don't, you can special summon this card from your hand. Now that doesn't seem too bad, and ultimately it isn't. But what makes this card weird is that Dark Tuner bits. Dark Tuners were a thing in the anime that basically acted like reverse tuners. Instead of adding their levels, you subtracted them. And if you went into the negatives, you would make a Dark Synchro. Dark Synchros would eventually get added to the game as normal Synchro monsters, and while it is possible they will do the same for Dark Tuners, they don't seem to be in a rush to do it. And even if they did, Dark Spider doesn't really have an interesting effect, as it's just a Cyber Dragon that just happens to be a tuner. Not sure what else they could give it to make it better without massive changes. Same thing goes for Bewitching Butterfly. It also has the Sidra effect, but also has the added effect that if your opponent controls the monster with the highest attack stat, this card fucking dies. Yeah, this card's entire purpose was to die 3 times in order to be part of a combo involving a card that benefited from having 3 copies of a monster with the same name in the graveyard. There's nothing really here, it's not even a tuner like Cocoon, so there's nothing really for me to say. I was originally expecting this to be where it ended, as the other cards used weren't insect related. But I decided to give another pass on the 5D decks to see if there was anything I was missing. And as it turns out there was, as some random duelists in the second episode of 5Ds happened to use some insect related cards. And while Retribution of the Antline is thematically with insects, it's not insect related by effect, so it doesn't count. I did, however, find a very interesting spell that he used called Insect Costume. Insect Costume lets you send an insect from your hands to the graveyard, then search any insect monster from your deck, then destroy an insect you control. Okay, so to get the obvious point out of the way, if this card was printed, it would not be worth playing. Sure, you get to search an insect, but that requires you to discard an insect and destroy one you control, meaning you go -2 in card advantage. which isn't really worth it. There's really no reason for this card to have two downsides, and obviously if it did get printed, it would likely only have one at most. And when it comes to it having one downside, I could see them going one of two ways, neither of which involve keeping the on-field destruction. Then again, maybe they would. It wouldn't be the first time they've done stupid stuff like that. The first one is just by discarding one card from the hand. How it would be if it didn't have the last effect. This would make it a more generic version of Zexal, discarding any insect for any insect at the cost of only adding it to the hand rather than special summoning it. The second idea is one that's less likely to happen, but a bit more interesting. Instead, it would send the top card of your deck to the graveyard to search an insect. Why do this? Well, in the episode this card was used, the effect was used to search and set up the summon of Doomdozer. And Doomdozer has the effect that when it deals damage to your opponent, they send the top card of their deck to the graveyard. So having that be the cost to use it would not only make it less of a downside than discarding one, and could even be an upside depending on what you mill, but it would also be thematic with what it was used with in the show. Regardless of which of these two get chosen, I could very well see this being a very good card, even if it was limited to only level 4s. Any level 3 or lowest into the graveyard can be revived by Arbalest the Rapid Fire. And discarding Insector Ladybug can start your combos by searching Dragonfly, like you would with Zexal. I'll be completely honest, I wasn't expecting to find a card this good from 5Ds, but hey, I guess that shows you can find some gems in unexpected places. Zexal is an interesting one to talk about, not because of what insects could be printed, but more so because said insects are ones that I'm surprised weren't chosen for previous animation chronicles, those being the mosquito cards. Their boss monster, number 2 Ninja Shadow Mosquito, was printed, so you'd think they would have released them alongside it, especially since this was around the release of Sprites. And given they were a level 2 deck, you'd think they would pair them together. And we did get a card they used in the deck, but instead their main deck monsters were the Cicada cards. And while they do work with number 2, they feel more like digital bug support than anything. I'm not saying this is a bad thing, I personally prefer the Cicada cards, it's just really fucking weird. Mosquito Force, when normal summoned, searches another Mosquito Force. Calling in right now, when this gets printed, it's going to search any mosquito card on summon. Not much else to say, it's just an archetypal searcher. It's pretty good. Would be nice if it also had a special summon condition, so it can more easily swarm the field. Mosquito Commander, on the other hand, not so much. Its effect is that if you control number 2, you contribute this card to place a hallucination counter on an opponent's monster. Now recall, this will be a quick effect when it's released, but aside from that, it's not great. It does act as quick negation thanks to the counter, but you'd probably want to use them as material for an XZ summon rather than just have them sit there. This honestly feels more like a graveyard effect that triggers by banishing this card more than a main effect. Maybe if this was an effect given the number 2 that lets you place a counter as a quick effect? Not much else to say, honestly. It's funny how cards having fewer effects not only makes them easier to read, but also makes it easier to decide whether or not these cards are good or interesting. Same thing applies to Ninjutsu Art of Mosquito Combustion. It deals 600 damage to each player for every hallucination counter on their monsters. Surprised it took us this long to get to an out of place burn card. Maybe if this was like Fire Ejection where it had a secondary effect you could use to instead place a counter on a monster, it would be fine? But no, this isn't good or interesting, outside of being a time card, but come on, you have better options for time cards. Ninjutsu Art of Mosquito Repellent, aside from having a name that sounds like it counters the archetype, has a very bizarre effect. You target an XZ monster you control that has no material, banish all mosquito monsters from your graveyard, then that monster gains 1000 attack for each one banished. But what's more, during the end phase, the monster you targeted is banished and your opponent is burned for their attack. So in theory, it is a finisher card. Banish a bunch of insects from your graveyard to make one big bug, dome the opponent for a fuckload of damage, then burn for the rest. But the big thing that makes this a bit odd to use is the no material bit. Outside of a digital bug, your XZ monsters will probably still have material on them when they leave the field, or will be ranked up into Zeus. I don't think the no material thing should be removed, since I could see this being annoying if used with something like Titanic Moth. Actually, would still probably be good with Moth. But it feels like such a weirdly specific restriction that it just screams it was thrown in for the anime. It's better than Combustion on the basis of giving you more damage, but it's certainly not a great card. That's all for the mosquito cards, but we still have 2 more cards to talk about from Zexal, thanks to the guy who used Cicadas, Eraser. Cicada Force is just Mirror Force for cicadas. It does have a difference in that it destroys all face-up monsters they control rather than just attack position ones, but other than that, it's just okay. Cicada Illusion is a bit more interesting as you activate it by targeting a defense position insect you control. It cannot be destroyed by battle, and if it changes battle position, it gains attack equal to its own defense. If it was also given effect protection, I could see this being worth consideration, even if it's unsearchable, as I can see it protecting a scary moth in a situation or two. Overall, there's room for stuff with Zexal, mostly because of how simple the effects are, and Mosquito's synergy with Sprite, unless Konami pulls a math mech and nukes Sprite off the face of the earth for no reason. Moving on to Arc 5 and... oh. So if this video was made a few years ago, we would have had something more to say here, as prior to 2019, the main insect support from this series didn't get printed. However, since then, Battle Wasps have been printed, and as a result, there is only one insect monster from Arc 5 that has been printed. Parasite Queen. It's a fusion monster that requires Fusion Parasite and a monster equipped with Fusion Parasite as material. And that right there is our first problem. In the anime, Fusion Parasite could be used as fusion material for any fusion summon, and when it was, it equipped itself to that monster, being able to detach itself to protect it. However, when it was actually printed, not only did it lose the equipped effect, but it can now only be used as fusion material if it was substituting for another monster in said fusion. These changes make Parasite Queen unsummonable in its current state, as one of its materials is a monster equipped with Fusion Parasite, which can't be done anymore outside of Pico and Antlion. And it only gets worse from here. She gains 300 attack for every Fusion Parasite on the field, and other monsters lose 800 attack while they have Parasite equipped to them. Also, if she battles an opponent's monster, you can equip the Parasite to that monster that was previously equipped to her. And she currently has no way of equipping a Parasite to herself. That's right, not only is she unsummonable, her effect doesn't even function. There are a few spells and traps that can equip Fusion Parasite to her, but I don't think you should be using back row to fix a card's broken effect. Speaking of, I won't be going in depth on the Parasite back row, despite talking about the back row for other insect decks. Partly because this video is already getting pretty long, but also because the cards they have are either not interesting to talk about, or are straight up busted in one way or another. The only thing I'll say is that Parasite Discharge is basically an e-tailer for this deck, and could have led to experimentation with it. I'm not even sure what could be done to salvage this. Sure, Queen could equip a Parasite to itself, but that doesn't change the busted summoning requirement, or her effect being incredibly mediocre. All for a monster that's peak attack value is 2800 and doesn't do much aside from battle. This was very clearly designed, not only as just an anime card, but as a card designed specifically to be used in a tag duel, and not at all in a standard match. I know that not every card needs to be competitive, but even from a casual perspective, this is just sad. It also kinda sucks that them not being printed means that they were robbed the honor of being the second Insect Fusion monster released, a title given to absolute fucking Hercules. At least Hercules is summonable and has an effect that can activate. It'd be a real shame to end off the segment like this, so here's one more Arc 5 insect card that wasn't printed. B Formation, the last Battle Wasp card. It's a continuous trap that activates by targeting a Battle Wasp you control. Each time your opponent normal or special summons a monster, it gains 400 attack. Yeah, I can see why this wasn't printed, this sucks. I also found out this card exists, it sucks, moving on. Damn, I guess we really are ending Arc 5 on a low note, huh? Really hope Vrains hits it out of the park with this, cause otherwise this will be a very depressing ending. Holy fuck guys, they hit it out of the park. Vrains was the last series I expected there to be any insect support, because I figured the series would just primarily be focused on pushing Cybers cards since it was the hot new thing, and to an extent that was the case. But there were a few duelists who used non-Cybers decks, most notably the Knights of Hanoi, who all used non-Cybers archetypes, and it just so happened that Faust was an insect user. However, this does bring us to a very strange talking point, because of his cards, there's only one insect in it. Not one unreleased insect, one insect, period. Motorworm Spreader Queen is a link-free light insect with 1000 attack points, points left, down, bottom left, and requires 2 or more insect monsters as summoning material. It gains 700 attack points for every insect on the field, including itself, and once per turn if it's not pointing to a monster, it can summon a Motorworm token, which is a level 1 light insect with no stats, to a zone it points to. Your opponent cannot target Motorworm tokens for attacks. Well guys, we've done it. After looking through all of the insects from the anime, we finally found one that has no issues that need to be fixed. Motor Worm Queen honestly is a card that could be printed today and likely would see play. To me, there are two big benefits to her. The first is how high her attack value can get. Just by existing, she hits the field with 1700 attack, and by getting 2 more insects on the field, she raises the 3100, more than Invincible Atlas. And with a full board of insects, she climbs to 5200. Just 100 off of Access Code Talker. Insects recently have been getting some decent OTK tools, and I think Queen would be a good addition to that. But the second thing she does is give Bee Troopers an easier line to Atlas. Obviously, being an insect link, she's going to be played in Bee Troopers, and because her effect lets her summon an insect token, that means any line that gets you to Seraph and Papillion, but is not able to get to the Atlas, can get to it now. This would be able to clean up some weaker hands that you draw into if you're unlucky, or allow you to play through hand traps easier, meaning you can end on an end board better than just Papillion Pass. Not to mention she pairs extremely well with Rika, allowing you to get to their Link 4. Motor Worm Spreader Queen is hands down the best insect card Konami has not released yet. Now while that's all there is for the insect monsters, there are a few spells and traps that Faust used that we can talk about. Motor Worm Bait is just worm bait, but for motor worms, complete with the same downside. If it locked you into insects or blinks, it would be pretty good, but as it stands, it's as good as worm bait, which isn't very. In fact, it's technically worse, because at least Motor Worm Bait summons earth insects, meaning can be used to make crawlers. Motor Worm Gate is also kinda bleh. If all monsters your opponent controls are insects, you can make an insect attack directly. There are a few ways Motor Worms can give your opponent insects, and kaijus are a thing, but other than that, it's whatever. A change that could be made to it though that I think would be really fitting would be if we also gave it the effect of Faust's skill, Double Bite. Double Bite was a skill that allowed an insect to attack twice per turn, and since the second attack was a direct attack thanks to Gate, I think it would be a thematic and useful change. We could also maybe change it so your opponent only needs to control one insect to allow the direct attack, since Wormgate only allows one insect to attack directly. Wormhole Defense is where things get even more interesting. It's a continuous spell that when activated summons a Motor Worm token, can destroy a token or insect you control to protect itself, and more importantly, it makes it so your opponent's insects they control cannot be tributed or used as link material. It took them nearly 2 decades, but Konami finally made a card that connects the give your opponents bugs playstyle, while preventing them from just getting rid of them. Funny how it all comes full circle. If this card was printed, I would also say let it search a Motor Worm card since they currently are unsearchable, but that would also be solved by giving them more main deck monsters. Man, imagine the alternate timeline where this got printed sooner and we actually got legacy support for the deck. Anyway, Egg Clutch is a continuous trap card that, if you special summon an insect monster, targets an opponent's monster and switches it to defense mode. It then negates their effects, makes them an insect, and prevents them from switching the battle position again. This card leaves the field when that monster does, and, once per turn, you contribute an insect monster you control to give your opponent 2 Motor Worm tokens. The activation condition sounds a bit tricky at first, but thanks to stuff like Seraphim Papillion, Cicada King, and the Seas, it's actually not that hard to special summon an insect on your opponent's turn. Really, the big issue with this card is that the battle position change is required for the rest of the effect to even go off, meaning it does nothing against Link monsters. The second effect, meanwhile, is actually pretty great. Not only does it give you 2 more insects, allowing Queen to rise up by 1400 attack, but it can also give you 2 tokens to punch over for game. Or at least it would if it didn't summon in defense mode, but realistically I think the printed version would let you choose the position to summon them in. Only change I think this would really need is not making the battle position change required. That way we could use it against Link decks. The last of the Motor Worm cards, and the last card of this video, is Worm Revival. Target 1 Link-free or lower insect in your graveyard, revive it, it cannot be destroyed for the rest of the turn, and summon a Motor Worm token to a zone it points to. It's okay. The protection is nice so the monster you bring back doesn't just immediately get killed again, and summoning a token can make Queen stronger, but on the other hand it's only really good for Queen. Armorhorn can already revive itself and there isn't really a benefit to bringing back any other insect. Plus only Queen and the Rika Link free point to your own zone, and the token will just get demolished in the case of summoning the Rika since it doesn't have the protection effect. It's far from the worst card we've talked about, but there's not much going for it compared to some of the other cards we talked about so far. Would be also nice if the last 2 cards were treated as Motor Worm cards so they could be searched in the future. And that was all the insect support from the anime, well excluding all the parasite cards. So, which of these cards would be the best to bring into the game? Well, as I should have made clear by now, Motorworm Spreader Queen is the standout card here, basically ready to ship as is. The rest of the cards meanwhile range from passable to needing a full rework. Some of the Motorworm and Weevil cards are on the right track, and Mosquito will probably be playable assuming Sprite is still around. Honestly, the biggest surprise was Insect Costume, which, with a few tweaks, could become one of the best pieces of insect support. As for the rest of the cards, yeah, they're gonna need a bit more to make them useful. I think the ones that are currently the worst are Parasite Queen and Bewitching Butterfly. And yes, that is in comparison to a fucking normal monster. Parasite Queen doesn't function properly due to Fusion Parasite's changes, and Bewitching Butterfly doesn't have a purpose. Arc 5 was hands down the worst when it comes to the insect support, though GX was also not fantastic. And 5Ds was carried entirely by Insect Costume. Probably would have been the worst without it. I was going to end this video saying that while I'd love some of these cards to be printed, I wasn't going to expect them anytime soon. But I actually got most of this video scripted before Rika got unveiled back in January, which was on my birthday, fun fact, and had to go back and edit some things after I was done procrastinating, which is why this video is coming out a few months after their release. Rika's existence definitely makes printing some of these cards more likely, and with it being the Year of the Light, I think we might see Motorworms in the next Animation Chronicles. You know, that or Armatos Legios. Then again, one of those archetypes has way fewer cards to print. This was a fun video to make though, regardless of the quality of the monsters in question. Let me know if you guys enjoyed it, and let me know if you'd like to see a video on the manga insects. My name has been Era, thanks for watching.